I would like to welcome you to the University of Pikeville's speaker series, Judicial Speaker Series for 2021. I'd like to thank the Kentucky Bar Foundation for their grant, which is allowing us to provide information to our students and our community about a variety of legal careers. And I'd like to welcome Alex Ward, who is a Eastern Kentucky attorney and an alumnus of the University of Pikeville, and one of my alums, actually. And Alex is currently in a smaller practice that practices in Eastern Kentucky, but in a wide area. And so we're going to kind of go through and talk a little bit about how he got where he is, because it's kind of an interesting career path. So, Alex, at what age, when do you think you came to the realization, I want to be a lawyer? I want to be an attorney.
I would say that was about my senior year of college was probably when that happened. As you know, I was played baseball at what was then Pikeville College, now UPIKE, and my career path was baseball until about my senior year. Probably had some inklings earlier in college that I kind of skewed towards and enjoyed the more analytical side of things, and could kind of see a path towards law school, but I can't really say that I had any driving force behind me or had even, prior to talking to you, put in place the steps that one takes to go to law school. And that was probably the end of my junior year or senior year of Pikeville College.
You were an extremely good baseball player. I remember that very well.
Well, thank
and you enjoyed the sport of it, but you were also an extremely good student. So steering you toward law school was kind of an easy path for me, because it was the kind of thing that you were interested in. You maybe just hadn't considered, because you were pretty focused on athletics.
I was fairly focused, but and I was in the history political science track, which is how I ended up with a lot of your classes. I think if you weren't my advisor, it might have been Gene Lovell was my advisor, but I ended up taking, I think, more classes obviously with you than with any other professor. And that track, one of the branches off of it is law school, and that's the one that made the most sense to me. And so once we started talking about it, I was still focused mostly on baseball, but I remember going to take the LSAT. It worked out, as we've discussed, it worked out fairly well for me. So, and then the options just opened up, and I got to go to the University of Kentucky Law School, which was the only one that I applied to. So it was a good thing they decided to take me. And then the rest is kind of just history.
And you went to what many would consider the top law school in the state, the exclusive law school in the state. And you said it was the only one you applied to. What about it drew you? Was it the name? Was it bleed blue?
I had some options. And really, had I not gone to the University of Kentucky, I probably would have left the state for law school. And at least at the time, I assume it's still true now. If you plan to stay in Kentucky post-graduation for your practice, the University of Kentucky works just as well as, like I considered Notre Dame, a few other places out of state. For in Kentucky, and I think regionally at least, UK works just as well. So then it came down to the decision, do I foresee myself practicing in the Commonwealth or moving somewhere else? I thought I would probably settle in somewhere Lexington East in Kentucky. So UK just made the most sense for me from that perspective.
One of the things I often talk to my students about is building that network of fellow attorneys that you're going to be practicing with and against for the rest of your life.
Correct.
And you build that by going to um, a law school within the state that you're intending to practice.
Mhm.
And
And I think it doesn't necessarily always end up that you do stay there. And what, I've practiced been partners with people from different law schools, but you are absolutely correct. I mean, on a day in, day out basis, I've found now over 18 years, you do see a lot of the same folks. And that's maybe something, I mean, on opposite sides of a case, I might have the same attorney as the defense attorney or the plaintiff's attorney opposite me all the time. You build relationships with these people. It's kind of the grease that makes the system run, and run smoothly. And if you have that base of, the initial conversations, I don't know how many times the initial conversations go back to where you went to law school. Oh, we both went to UK. Well, you had Professor so and so for civil procedure. And it's just an easy way to draw connections, even with people that are on the other side against you in a lot of cases.
and I'm sure in a lot of cases, you have mutual contacts, you have
Mhm.
mutual friends.
Yeah.
Um, it's people don't realize how small the world of lawyers is. I mean,
Mhm.
and for that matter, the world of judges.
Yes. It's kind of like the whole Kevin Bacon game. I mean, you pretty much can connect somebody through about one or two steps, to find out who they are, what they do, things like that. And you're right, judges. I mean, I can't point to a statistic, but I would imagine the majority of our judges went to the University of Kentucky Law
Yes.
School. Um, so yeah, you're right. It's kind of it's a web, but it's not a very sprawling web.
All right. When you came out of law school, one of the things that I often talk to my students about that they don't realize is everybody thinks that they're going to go to law school and become uber wealthy. They are going to, they have these mental images of some of these really powerful, and I'm really embarrassed that a name just popped into my head. Someone like a Kardashian who was an
Yeah,
extremely wealthy attorney.
yeah,
That's not the way it works. The average
no,
lawyer, a few years ago, I remembered this statistic because it stuck in my head and it caused me pain. The average lawyer coming out of law school in the state of Kentucky, if he could find a job as a lawyer, and that was a big if. This is about 4 years ago.
mhm,
If they could find a job as a lawyer, the starting salary was $35,000 a year.
yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's I was fortunate in a couple of ways. When I came out of law school, the University of Kentucky had a ridiculous higher rate of, I think it was like 95% of us had a job within the first year. That is no longer the case. And it started about, like you said, about 5 years ago, somewhere in there, and it dropped at one point perilously low. I mean, it was disturbing, because it leads to a couple of things that we can talk about in a second. But I was also fortunate that I signed on with a mid-size civil defense firm, which, you know, we're still not talking Kardashian money, but it was a little north of 35. But one thing that I don't think a lot of people realize is, one, if you come out of law school and, like you talked about, let's say that placement rate is 50%,
Mhm.
you now have 50% of your law school class essentially hanging up a shingle, right? And so, one, you're missing out on the mentorship that you receive when you're at a firm where you have older lawyers to make sure you don't mess up. Two, you're going to have limited resources in terms of staff, people to help you out to, again, make sure you don't mess up. And three, when you hang a shingle, it's going to be a while before you build up a client base under the best situation to start bringing in some revenue. So when you talk about average salaries, I mean, there are people who might go 6 months and they're maybe keeping their lights on. So it can be perilous, but let's talk about my journey. Even if you sign on like I did with a mid-size, we were about 47 lawyers, I think 47 to 50 fluctuating. You're hired on as an associate out of law school. You're on that bottom rung of pay and you're on the top end of do the job. So it's, you know, and probably not unlike a lot of professions, that means you're putting in a whole lot of hours for an okay to decent salary.
Mhm.
But that's just the way it works. I mean, you come in at that level. When I started, it was 7 years to partnership, 7.5 really. You kind of donate 6 months to the firm after you pass the bar. So starting on your first full year, it was 7 years at my firm to partnership. And for those 7 years, there are moderate increases in pay and no real decrease in work while your responsibility climbs.
Mhm.
So as you get to be, your fourth, fifth year, you have more responsibility, same amount of work, a little more pay. And then it kind of works its way up. And then you get to kind of senior associate where you're handling cases kind of on your own, but not really. And then when you make partner, and that's the golden area everybody wants to get to, you get a rude awakening that I think I made more my last year as an associate than I did my first year as an equity partner, because it's just the way things work out in the finances of the situation. But eventually, if you stick it out long enough and you're successful and you're lucky and you get good breaks, you're still not a Kardashian. So that's kind of the path you can take.
One of the things that you were saying that really interested me is um, hanging a shingle, which means going out and doing a private practice, is
Mhm.
probably the riskiest way to possibly go in this.
Yes.
And it seems like you're saying that if you want to, maybe if you want to do criminal work, you would go to work in as a public defender.
Mhm.
But trying to get yourself, if you're wanting to do civil law, trying to get yourself into a medium-sized practice sounds like the best of all worlds for building a career.
Yeah, I mean, it can work great. I would say there are trade-offs. I mean, and we can talk about this. I've been at a medium-sized firm, a huge firm, and now back down to a kind of small boutique type firm. The pay, like if you can be one of the people in law school, and some of us have options to choose. Some of people, if you get an offer, you take it. But if you can get with one of the really, really large firms, your initial pay is going to start higher. The climb can be tougher,
Mhm.
and there are relationship differences. There's just differences in the size of firm as to on that continuum I like to talk about between a profession and a business, right? So we're all at some level both,
Yes.
because you have to make money. That's the way of the world. You're a professional, a self-governed profession, so you're there to provide services to the public. And then there's a mesh of that somewhere. I think at the mid-sized firm, you have business concerns, but I would still rate it higher on the professional standards. And I don't mean a competence knock, like that people don't do a good job, but your primary concern is still the service level issues. Are we doing good work? I mean, that was our mentor at our litigation senior partner at the mid-sized firm. His whole thing, we did no advertising. We did no reach out, try to go get new clients. It was do good work and the work will come. Once you get to the biggest firms, it's, hey, did you go talk to a client today? Did you sign up new clients today? What are our billing rates at? Still do great work. And then at the smallest firms, it's almost exclusively personal relationships with your clients. What do you need help with today? Because we get a lot of comeback clients, and a much more personal relationship, high profession, and the business kind of drags behind the professional part of it. So if you come out and you go to one of the largest firms, your salary is going to be up there. It's really good. Your hours are going to be big time up there. And it's going to be um, a progression through a business. I thought the firm that I started with was, like you said, for me, the best of both worlds because I had enough people there to make sure I didn't mess up.
I think that's
I,
important with that point that you're making is
yes.
that mentoring that you get from, you get a lot of, I get a lot of students that come out of law school and think, I want to hang a shingle. I want to be an independent attorney, which is all well and good. But that mentoring that you get at the larger law firms is crucial to,
Mhm.
I compare it to the, internship for a physician. Uh,
Exactly.
it's the same kind of, you're practicing with a safety net, and that is so important.
It's crucial because I know a lot of people joke you come out of law school and you have no idea how to be a lawyer. I won't go that far. I mean, it does teach you the thought processes, things like that, but you don't know what you're doing really. Especially on a complex case, kind of high level stuff. You're right. You've got a safety net there because everything you do, you have someone with a lot of experience saying, I don't know if I would go that way, or no, we need to do this, or did you notice this? And a lot of times the answer is yeah, when you absolutely did not notice that. So you try to dig your way back out. But I think it's huge. And the only thing I could say, because you don't always have that choice, if you don't have that choice, that network you talked about earlier, rely on it. If you have to go out and hang a shingle, you've got a friend who's at a big firm. You've got someone you know who has had their private practice for 15 years. Find those people and recreate that net somehow. To this day, all friends, acquaintances, and say, hey, this issue, have you ever dealt with it and talk it through?
I think that's such an interesting
So, it's really important.
yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
go
so
ahead.
interesting that to this day you still rely on. I mean, you've been practicing for close to 20 years and you still talk to mentors. You still talk
Mhm.
to people, and I'm sure you mentor others also. But I think that is something that so many of my students don't realize how important, and for that matter, I don't think the community realizes how important it is to have an attorney who is willing to talk to others and willing to consult with others
Mhm.
and all of that. So I just think that is so incredibly important.
I mean, the
So,
joke phrase that one of my partners that I started working for and worked for until I became a partner at my first firm was, "There's no pride in authorship here." So if I'm drafting something and you've got something better to add, put it in there. And because the result, quality representation is the goal, not some kind of ego stroke where you're saying, oh, I drafted this awesome brief. So yeah, I would just caution everybody, don't get too in love with yourself, which is very hard for me because I love myself, but you just have to reach out
you're very
and
lovable.
yes, and those options are out there. So yeah.
I, I think it's just interesting that you, a lot of my students follow, because they come out of law school with huge debt.
Hmm.
One of the things I always caution my students going to law school is be careful how much debt you get yourself into. Because as we said earlier, you may come out of law school with $100,000 worth of debt and a starting salary of 35,000. It
Yeah,
doesn't compute.
doesn't work well.
And
Um,
so some of them will go into public defender work to try to get that. I don't know what the length of time is now that you have to work public defender to get a lot of your student loans wiped out, but a lot of people will do that. And you're suggesting, if you will, another way to learn the legal profession. And
Mhm.
that is by going in as a junior associate and
Mhm.
into one of the larger law firms and working your tail off.
For years. Yeah. I mean, it's, it's a lot of Saturday nights. I remember as an associate, we got brought in to defend a large company on a bunch of cases that were in Baltimore, Maryland. I mean, I'm sitting at a law firm. I work in Ashland, Kentucky, and then for about a year, I would spend two at least weeks a month living in Baltimore, Maryland in an extended stay hotel. So, there's a lot that comes with it. So it is a lot of work, but you get a lot of experience.
Absolutely. And that can't be, you can't sit there and go, well, I learned this, I learned that. It is more of almost internalizing it
Mhm.
that helps you become a better lawyer. And I think people have a mistaken idea that when you come out of law school, you're a lawyer.
Right.
Whatever that means, not exactly sure
Yeah.
what that means. But I think that's a really interesting idea. All right, the state of Kentucky does not have specialties in law, and we all know that. And at the same time, there are law firms that are more involved in bankruptcy law, or there are
Mhm.
law firms that do personal injury law, or there are firms that do um, criminal law. And some of the big law firms have segments of their law firm that this segment does this segment
Mhm.
does corporate law or whatever. So we've established that we don't have specialties. But that being said, what direction has your practice evolved into?
Okay, I am a civil litigator, civil litigation attorney. As you just said, we don't have specialties. If you come to me with a criminal law case, I'm going to send you to someone who doesn't specialize in criminal law, but they're a criminal lawyer. So, I mean, and the first, we might not call it specialties, but you want a specialty lawyer for many things. Like the first one you named, Nancy, bankruptcy.
Oh,
You want a lawyer who does bankruptcy if you have a bankruptcy issue. So if you call me, I'm going to send you to someone that I know is at a firm that does a lot of bankruptcy law. What I do, and it's shifted only in percentages over the course of my career, is civil lawsuit. There's an issue between person A and company B, or company A and company B, and I represent one of those two companies, or the individual or a company. Early on, obviously, at my first firm and at the large firm I worked at, I did a lot more defense work, but still some plaintiffs work. Now I do way more plaintiffs work, but still some defense work. Um, and even within civil litigation, there are areas that some of us do more of and less of. It's like at one point I represented railroads a lot. So when friends would come up to me and say, "Hey, something happened," I said, "Wait a minute." And this may sound crass, I guess. I said, "Did someone get hit by a train?" And if they said no, I would say, "Well, let me redirect you to someone else." Um, Now I do a lot of medical malpractice work. I've done it on both sides, defense and plaintiffs. Obviously, personal injury, slip, fall, things like that, and some contract work. So I will actually do contract work on both plaintiffs and defense. A lot of people won't do that if they haven't had that experience. I happen to have that experience as part of, naturally grew out of my practice of representing corporations. So that's kind of the way I go. I actually am the person who's in court trying cases. We joked about everybody thinks you're Perry Mason, but it never actually works like it does for Perry.
you mean people
Um,
don't jump out and go, I did it?
it was my fault. I've never heard anybody say that yet. I'll call you the first time that I do, but it's also different than what people think in that. when you say you're a litigator, criminal prosecutors and, like you said, the public defender's office, I think are awesome because those people are in court all the time. I mean, all the time. When I say that I'm a litigator, I go to court on my cases fairly frequently, but most of my time is still in my office or on deposition or drafting documents, reading pleadings. So when you say a litigator, you're still doing mostly office work. It's just that when there are trials, when there are hearings, you're the one who goes and does it. So that's kind of what my practice has been.
You just led me to something that I find interesting. I have a friend who is a rather big time litigator in the state of Indiana. And I asked him once, if you were to give advice to my students who are potential lawyers, what would you suggest they take in college that they may not think about? And I was thinking he might steer me toward debate and speech and public speaking, because that's such an important thing for a litigator to be comfortable. And he said, any form of a writing class, creative writing. And I thought to myself, well, you're not doing a lot of creative writing as a lawyer. And he goes, you'd be surprised. So if you had it to do all over again as a student, you led me to this, with what you just said about your writing. What courses would you have taken in college that might have helped you in law school and might help you today?
I think history, political science is actually a pretty good route to go. I think that English majors do very well in law school and in the practice of law. Some of my best partners, people that I rely on, like that I would still submit a brief to. Let's say I've got a Sixth Circuit brief coming up, and I sit down and I draft that. I have friends who were English majors in college. I have one friend who actually got her doctorate in English and then went to law school. You better believe that I send her briefs and say, hey, look through this. Tell me how hilljack I sound in this brief, and send it back to me. So English is good, but anything that makes you read a lot, that makes you write a lot, especially from a persuasive bent, and anything that makes you analyze, or what we call it in law school, it turns into called issue spotting. So you read a set of facts and you say, it's really a test of, are you thinking like a lawyer? So you read a set of facts and you say, oh, I see what the issue there is going to be. Was there an agreement actually reached there? Was there a meeting of the minds? So you're just issue spotting. Well, you kind of do that with history, with political science. You look at what was the cause of this, what were the ramifications or what came after. So it's kind of anything that makes you read and comprehend, draft and draft persuasively, and 3, issue spot or analyze is going to help you tremendously. I like to joke, like I said, I'm a litigator. I don't write as much as some other lawyers, but I write a lot. When my son complains about his paper for school, I love to say, yeah, you're right. I wrote a 25-page brief today, but I get it. You're overwhelmed. So it is a lot of reading, a lot of writing. Not as much arithmetic unless you pick the wrong specialty.
Well, if you go into bankruptcy law, you might have to do a little bit more,
Yeah, like
a
I
little
try
bit
to
more of
avoid
your
math.
arithmetic.
Yeah.
You mentioned something
Oh, let
offhand.
me interrupt. There is one lucrative area I forgot.
Yes.
Intellectual property law. So if you have an inclination towards science, people don't understand this. For example, if you have a biology degree and you can then go to law school and then get an intellectual property practice license, all those $35,000 things we talked about go out the window. Those people make bank.
I had a student who was a computer science major years ago, 25 years ago, and went to law school and went in that direction, which, everybody was saying, what do you mean you're going to be a CS major and then go to law school? But it was an interesting route. You mentioned something offhand, and you've used the term a couple of different times, and please help my students and the anyone in the community that is listening to this. What's the Sixth Circuit?
Okay, the Sixth Circuit, that's in federal court system. Each state is kind of like a mini federal system. So in Kentucky, you have the district courts, which are your lowest level litigation courts. Then you have circuit courts, which are a higher value case, where we go to have controversies decided. That's usual trial courts, kind of what people are used to from TV. Then you have the Kentucky Court of Appeals, which is the next level up. So that's a decision has been made, usually. And the parties are going up there to say, we think something wrong happened. So that's a panel of judges. You'll file your briefs. Sometimes you'll have oral arguments, and then they'll decide. If you think they're wrong, you go to the Kentucky Supreme Court, right? So the Kentucky Supreme Court will then, you'll rebrief, you'll re-argue, and they'll decide. In the federal system, you have the district courts, which are the trial courts.
And there's one of those in Pikeville.
There's one of those in Pikeville, Ashland. We're split into Eastern and Western District of Kentucky.
Right.
And that's your trial court. And then above that, you go to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is a court of appeals, but for several states, for the Sixth Circuit of the United States. And then after them is the United States Supreme Court, which everybody's kind of familiar with, more so from the news and political reasons, frankly. But so it's the appellate court in federal court. And the reason I said it's pretty serious stuff, for lack of a better way to describe it. So these are top-notch judges who either matriculated up from the district courts, or one of my law professors from UK is on the Sixth Circuit. I mean, these are really sharp people. So when you get there, you want to do your best job so that you don't look stupid in front of a bunch of really smart people.
And the Sixth Circuit is rather famous in legal circles for being one of the most rigorous, for being one of those that feeds into the Supreme Court significantly.
Yes.
So, when you just kind of, offhand go a Sixth Circuit case, that I want people to understand that's a big deal, because
yes,
and also the other thing is, what people may not realize is Sixth Circuit, the Supreme Court, any of the appellate courts, there's a certain amount of picking and choosing whether or not a case is accepted. And for that matter, in just about any legal proceeding, there's a bit of picking and choosing as to whether or not a case can move forward. And so how did you end up going from a medium size, I assume multi-discipline law practice, to a boutique law firm where you're at right now? You're at, if I'm not mistaken, you're at Vanover, Hall and Bartley.
That's correct.
And it is it 4 principals?
It is 4, yes. Yep.
And I will say this out loud, or as I sometimes jokingly refer to it, the Cade alumni law firm, because 3 of the 4 principals, Alex and Keith Bartley and Adam Hall, are all my former students. So the only one I didn't have was Jim Vanover.
Yeah. Well, I came out of law school and went to a firm, like I said, a kind of mid-sized defense firm. And it was exactly what you described. It was multidiscipline. We called it, the way that one broke down was second floor, third floor. If you were literally of our building, if you were on the third floor, you were a litigator like me. If you were on the second floor, you did everything else, or as they said, you practiced law. So that was your bankruptcy attorney, mergers, acquisitions, things like that. Hoity-toity kind of fancy lawyers. So then I was there, became a partner there, was a partner there for a few years, and we were approached about the opportunity to merge into a much larger firm. So what that means essentially is you now become the larger firm, and we became the regional office in our location for that. At that point, me, one of my good friends, a couple other people became a practice group in that firm, doing kind of what we had always done. But it's a very respected firm. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Dynamics do change as you become that large. Offices all over the United States. I have partners, and I was a partner in that firm that I've never even met, talked to, et cetera. And then we go all the way back to the beginning. So I was there for quite a few years, and we go all the way back to the beginning, what you talked about your net of people that you know. Well, Adam and I had classes with you at the same time,
Yes, you did.
played baseball together. So we had talked over the years. It'd be fun to practice law together at some point if it ever made sense. And we started having more of those talks. And so I had always done plaintiff's work. I was one of the only people at my firm who did any plaintiff's work at all during that process. And I had a primary defense counsel practice. But I'd always kind of enjoyed the plaintiff's work, the plaintiff side of it. So I talked to Adam more and more. It made more and more sense. So what we decided to do is I transferred over, joined up with Vanover Hall and Bartley, and opened the Ashland office where I'm talking to you from today. Of course, Vanover Hall and Bartley is a Pikeville mainstay. It's been there for like 40 years. Keith is a mainstay in Prestonsburg and Floyd County. So I opened this office and we expanded kind of our breadth up to Northeast Kentucky. And that's kind of the path it takes. And I talked to you early on about it's like riding the wave. Things happen. Like, there was a very real scenario where I stayed at my first firm forever. We stayed a 50-person firm. There was a very real scenario where I stayed at our merged into firm. It was comfortable. It was a way to go. But there was something that, I wanted to try, and I thought it made a lot of sense career-wise. So here I am now, and we're about a year and a half in, and I think it's been a good decision so far.
Well, and if I could interject also, you are married, you have a child. That
Yeah.
some of the work in the large law firms, like you were saying, the multi-state huge law firms, those can eat you alive.
Oh yeah.
They can take your life over completely. I've just popped into my head the old TV show Boston Legal. When you watch that TV show, you notice those lawyers never went home.
I mean, and there's a truth to that. Like the scenes where it's dark outside and you're in a conference room still talk, that's real. I mean, and anybody who wants to go into the practice needs to know that is real. I mean, and it's case dictated almost. You have to do it till the work is done, is what I always tell people. And one of the things that I've been able to do is, and what we're really getting at here is a work-life balance. I've been able to still, for example, I coach baseball at our local high school. So I'm able to maneuver my schedule around enough to do that. But when people say, how are you out here at 4:00? I say it's because I'm in my office on Saturday, or, hey, after this game's over, I'm going back to work. So you can maneuver things around to make it work. But the thing is, the work's still got to get done. To your point, there is more flexibility once you get down to different law firms versus others. So, and there is still, despite what we just talked about, if you're coming in extra hours, you're coming in on weekends, which is reality. At some of the larger firms, there's still also the perception of you're going to be here at 8 a.m, you're going to be here at 5. In other words, putting in the office hours while everyone else is there, while your legal assistants, your office managers, they're all there. And then plus the other stuff. Whereas at other firms, and it changes also associate to partner, there's no question. But at the other firms, like now, if I need to leave at 2:00 for an hour, I just leave at 2:00 for an hour and come back. So there is flexibility issues for sure.
So it sounds like it's a good fit for you personally, and
yes,
that's what you're looking for. All right, before we wrap this up, one of the things that I always think is kind of fun is to ask attorneys who've been in practice for a little while about memorable cases or memorable things that they have had, that they've been involved in. What are some of your great memories of your career?
And I think this is, every case is unique, right? But when you do, we don't specialize, but when you get in your niche, we'll say, a lot of times you say, oh, I've had that case 3 times, right? So you have to be careful not to just fall into a rut of this worked last time, so I'm gonna do it again this time, over and over. So occasionally, as litigators and especially as partners, you have the option to take a case to break you out of the doldrums. That case presented itself to me at one of my previous firms, and it was a Communications Decency Act case, which does not sound exciting to any person on the planet except a lawyer. What made this case exciting to me is it involved a Bengals cheerleader, a defamation accusation of cheating on someone, and then the added bonus of she had also been having an affair with one of her students. So this is the farthest thing from a railroad defense case I could find at the time. So I took it and did it. And what we talk about riding the wave is it turned out to be a nationally relevant case, because what the Communications Decency Act does, very low level, just to get it out there. If an internet service provider, it allows open posting to their site, you can sue the people who make the post. There's a defense there under the law for the people, the service provider. So what ended up happening is we went to federal court and we became the first lawyers in the country to actually go to trial on a Communications Decency Act defense. So we talked about baseball. I finally ended up getting interviewed by ESPN, and it was over a lawsuit.
I was gonna say that made your life right there.
Yeah. So it was fun. And it actually made good law, because it then goes to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. They agree with us, and it established, well, and let me backtrack. When I say it made good law, I mean it made law that is standing. So yes, people can agree or disagree whether it's a good law, but we won and it still stands. So it made good law. And it was very interesting facts that I probably won't go into too much because they were very salacious.
Yeah, I as soon as you said communication decency, I will admit I kind of went, where is this going to go? But it's interesting. I've interviewed several attorneys now, and their memorable cases have been such a wide variety of things. I never would have expected something like that out of your practice.
Yeah.
But I think that's interesting that you said you went out of your comfort zone and tried something different. I think that's absolutely fascinating. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we end this that you think the community or future law students need to know about the practice of law?
I think, and I probably was going to go a different route with this, and then it just, right when you said that, it hit me. For the folks that plan to go to law school, it's something that will be talked about and you won't really think about it your whole time. It won't, because it won't seem important, but it's collegiality. And I think, and if you talk to lawyers older than me, they will hone in on this more than I do. And these are the people that were my mentors. So I think they helped me to be a lawyer who practices collegially. But and in our current society, it's harder and harder to find, but it's the idea of working as adversaries, but helping each other out, not being strident, being kind to other lawyers, and just you're going to be in fights all the time as a lawyer. They don't have to be personal fights. They don't have to be make it as hard as possible on the other side. Obviously, you zealously advocate for your clients, but you can do it in a friendly manner. Some of my best friends are lawyers who are against me a lot. So, and I think it's important that it makes our system way better.
I think one of the things that we talked about earlier is today you may be going against someone in court, and tomorrow they may be on the same side with you. and vice versa. And if you make the other attorney the adversary instead of the issue being the adversary, you've got a problem.
You've made a real mistake. I mean, and the perfect example, Nancy, just happened last week. I won a summary judgment in a pretty big case against a lawyer on the other side. He congratulated me. You know what? The next day, we were exchanging communications on a case where we're co-counsel on the same side. So it's exactly what you did. You summed it up perfectly. It's the issue that you're dealing with. It's the facts that you're dealing with. The other person is not your enemy. And to that point, I've always said the best litigators, we could walk into court, you hand us each a side of the case, and we go get it. So, you know, I could be represent you or the other side and do my job. So I think that's I guess the other last piece of advice would be, don't be so sure that you have to put your blinders on and be a true believer. I think you're more effective if you can empathetically put yourself on both sides and see because then you're going to see the strengths and weaknesses of your own case. So I truly believe as a litigator, I should be able to argue the other side just as well as I do my own before I go into a hearing or a trial.
If you'll remember when you were a student in my classes, I used to always joke about to my students, don't try to argue with me because I'm a little bit older and wilier,
Yes.
and I can argue your side probably a little bit better than you can. And that just comes from years of study of political science. But in the same thing, in the legal profession, if you can study the other side, you know what your weaknesses are.
And you better do it. And frankly, that probably stuck with me from college of the whole I can argue your side better than you because it's so important. The lawyer who's able to do that, the historian who's able to do that is in a way better shot and a way better spot, and you'll come up with better arguments because you know what your weaknesses are. I've seen too many lawyers who just dig in and say, I'm right, so that's it. It doesn't work.
That's never going to work, and it's not going to work in front of a jury either. Never. So I'd like to thank you for taking some time out. For those of you who don't know, Alex took some time out on Saturday to come in and talk to us a little bit. And I'd like to thank Alex Ward for enlightening us a little bit about what it's like to practice law at different types of law firms. And I'd like to again thank the Kentucky Bar Foundation for their grant. This has been an interesting thing for me, and it's very special for me because I get to go back and interview some of my alums, and I'm so proud of them. I'm so proud of the man that Alex has become. He's established himself as a good, solid attorney, and I'm very proud of that. He would have been a good baseball player, but I think the attorney thing lasted a little bit longer.
A little bit longer.
So I'd like to thank him, and let's say goodbye at this point.